Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Giving and Receiving Feedback or Productive Workplace Feedback. My name is Caitlin Hennessy. I'm the Program Coordinator here at Global Connections. Our goal at Global Connections is to provide engaging co- and extracurricular programming for online students anywhere you have an internet connection. And presenting this evening for us is Julia Schonert. She is an instructor at WSU's Carson College of Business, as well as a senior organizational development consultant. I'm going to turn it over to Julia. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm super excited to be with you guys. Well, as Caitlin said, I am an instructor for Washington State, and I've been there with the school for about, since 2009. And prior to that, I worked out at NASA in the aerospace community for about 15 years. And I also worked for a couple of years for the Small Business Development Center in response to Hurricane Ike. And so I worked specifically on a contract for the Hurricane Business Recovery Center, and we helped businesses. Some were completely destroyed, some were just needed a little bit of help, and everything in between. So did that for a couple of years. And then after that, I joined Houston Methodist. And so I worked for a hospital system, and I've been there since 2012. And my role as the senior organization development consultant is to coach leaders for better effectiveness. I specifically work with the C-suite and with directors and managers, but I also work with staff members. And so a lot of what we're going to go over tonight is applicable for any level of any person up and down the chain of command. And also I like to say everything that we learn here is also applicable to outside of work. I often find that the skills that I learn at work are so helpful to the relationships that I have outside of work. So I want it to be something that you find really useful. And please do feel free to just ask questions as we go along or speak up with any examples you have. I don't want this to feel too formal. I'd rather it just feel kind of like a conversation as we go along. So I'm really excited to be here with y'all. And I think, I don't know about you, but for many people, I think giving feedback can be really tough. Having difficult conversations can be kind of something that's tough to do. And I don't think it comes really naturally to us. I don't think it's really intuitive to us. And it's really been my experience that not very many people were raised in a way that they had the ability to practice these as we grew up. So we weren't really taught how to have conversations that were difficult with others or how to give difficult feedback. And so I think it's even that much more important as we get into the workforce that we learn how to do that. So with that said, we'll just jump right into it and see what we have. So tonight, over the next hour, this is what I hope we'll accomplish. I hope you'll walk away understanding the components of effective feedback. I also hope that you'll learn how to reduce defensiveness when giving feedback. We know that can be an issue. And you'll learn how to give effective feedback. So I'm going to provide you with 3 different models that I think are effective, that have worked really well for my clients, and I think they'll work well for you. And then we'll have some practice time where we'll apply these feedback models to either situations that you have that you'd like to work through. Maybe maybe there's some feedback that you need to give and you're not sure how to do it. We can work through it tonight together. And if not, I have a few examples that I will bring to the table. So I just want to start off. I think it's important to kind of get to know what you think as kind of a baseline for what we're going to go through tonight. And so I'm interested in finding out from your perspective, why do we provide feedback? Why do we provide feedback? Learn, grow, and become more effective and efficient. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely, to collaborate. And probably, depending on the way we give it, it will feel more or less collaborative so that we can learn from our mistakes and so others can learn from theirs. To effectively navigate workplace situations and disagreements, absolutely. So there's a couple of things that we're going to learn tonight, which is how to engage in a difficult conversation, how to begin one. I think a lot of times that's the hardest part, is how do you actually start that conversation? And then secondly, how do we provide the feedback that we're wanting to provide once we do enter that conversation? Yeah. If you are a person that likes to receive feedback, why do you like to receive feedback if it's different from the answers you already gave? So for very similar reasons, you all like to know how to improve, what you're doing well, whether or not you're doing something correctly, other person's perspectives. There are some people who don't like to receive back. Why would they not want to receive feedback? Or why would it be uncomfortable for them to receive feedback? Absolutely. Criticism or complaint. Pride gets in our way if it's something that we feel like is unflattering to us. Yeah. Do you think that whether or not someone would like to receive feedback um, is different for different generations? What generation do you think desires feedback the most? Yes, research tells us that millennials need constant feedback, younger generations, and that depending on the generations as you go up in age, it varies. Cultural aspects and how engaged they are in society. Interesting, yes. Okay. So we recently read some research that millennials love feedback, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, that they appreciate the feedback. Um, so I'm glad you brought that up, Nicole, because what I'm finding in my work is that the desire to have feedback so regularly has caused almost a dissatisfaction and disengagement with some of our younger employees because the managers don't have time to give that attention to that much feedback. So I think it could turn into something that becomes more of a burden for the management than a gift for the employee. So one last baseline that I'm curious with you guys is, what's your favorite method to receive feedback? Oh, I read sandwich method and I immediately thought of like a ham sandwich. In person, verbally, orally. Um, I love a ham sandwich. Not in person. Okay, so would that be an email then, or a letter written to you? Do you think, if it's not in person? Okay. So see, these are all important things to understand before we provide someone feedback. What's comfortable for them, the way they like to receive feedback, because they're going to be much more open to the feedback that we're willing to provide them. I would say for me personally, I don't mind receiving feedback, but it might depend on who it's coming from, the method I want to receive it. I love that. So I love that you even said that you want to receive feedback in email so you can go back and refer to it. I would say if you get those, and if you're a person that has a tendency to worry or wonder what your performance is like, that you save those and put them in a folder in your email and mark it as the ways that you make a difference so that you can go back and review those. And it's something good to bring up during your performance appraisal time. So, yeah, it's good because sometimes we worry a lot, don't we? I think that's human nature. So I just think that's a good idea to, how do I make a difference? I just click on that folder. You know what? Somebody thought I was doing a great job, and we're not going to just change dramatically. So that's a good way to do it. And in terms of your performance appraisal, this is kind of helps you to keep a record. Oh, these are the kinds of things that I've done this year where I've done a really great job. I'm going to give my boss feedback on what I did well. So, all right, so we're going to move on. I like this quote. I will own that probably early on in my career, I did not like to receive feedback. In fact, if I was going to receive feedback, it would make me sick to my stomach because I wasn't sure how I was performing. And what I realized is I wasn't receiving feedback regularly enough so that if I was going to receive it, I had to question whether or not it was going to be good or bad. Now, receiving feedback regularly, that's pretty subjective. So I wouldn't expect it on a daily basis, but I would think that once a week or once every other week or once a month would be probably plenty for me. But I do like this quote. We all need people who will give us feedback because that's how we improve. And so I want you to be thinking about feedback in terms of growth and not something that's punitive. Now, not everybody has the ability to deliver feedback in a productive, effective way, but that's why we're here tonight, because we want to learn how to do that so that people will be receptive to our feedback, right? So I want you guys to think of someone that does a good job providing feedback. It's really important to have that person in mind. And then I want you to think specifically, what do they actually do that makes their feedback so valuable and the way they deliver it so valuable to you? What are some answers to that? Why can you take their feedback? So your professor gives you excellent feedback and you feel like it's really valuable. What is it specifically that they do or say? Gentle in the correction rather than condescending or rude. Yes, absolutely. Specific, not vague. That is so important. I think something that is also really important is that we trust the person. They offer suggestions for improvement. So the sandwich method, the person says something you've done well, a place to improve, and then gives you another positive so that you feel that you end up on a positive. She'll point out all the positives as well as where I missed information, keeping it positive. So I think it's important that people have enough positives. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was written by Stephen Covey. And one of the things that I do too. So, Nicole, you'll be familiar then with the emotional bank account, that he talks about the concept of the emotional bank account. And the concept is just like a bank account that we're making deposits, positive deposits for people over time, so that when we have to take a withdrawal, and a withdrawal might be a criticism or a mistake or a missed opportunity or a promise not kept, that when we make that withdrawal, we've made enough positive deposits over time that the withdrawal doesn't bankrupt the relationship. And I see feedback the same way, is that we need to give enough regular positive feedback so that when we do have criticism or correction, that we're not bankrupting the relationship. And so this is the first tip for giving feedback, is that I want you to look for things that people do well. I want you to regularly look for opportunities to praise and give positive feedback to people. And you can do that using the models that we're going to share tonight. All right. Here's another reason why we give feedback. Research shows that one of the best ways to help employees thrive is to give them feedback. It increases a sense of learning and vitality. And when we talk about a sense of learning and vitality, then we're going to be able to draw a line and say that also relates to employee engagement. And the cost of turnover is astronomical. So it's important that we're meeting our employees' needs and helping them to stay engaged. And part of engagement is regular communication. Feedback doesn't always have to be corrective. It could be appreciative. It could be positive, so that whatever it is we're giving feedback about would be something that the employee would like to repeat. You know, the more things that we're praised on and the more specific it is, then the more times we're going to see that behavior repeated. And so feedback is very important. It improves the employee's feeling of they feel validated, they feel valued and appreciated in the organization. Have any of you ever worked for an organization where you received regular feedback? Or maybe if you haven't worked in an organization, maybe for school. Ah, Christopher, so you had to ask for feedback. How often do you think you had to ask for it? Or let me ask you, the times when you received it, was it just with your performance appraisal? Having to ask for feedback. Okay. So you worked for an organization where pretty much there was an absence of feedback. Wow, you've had to ask for performance appraisals. Interesting. Okay. That kind of blows me away. I think I worked for a pretty progressive organization when it comes to managing talent and engagement for employees, and really training our leaders to try to meet the needs of our employees. So I am sometimes surprised. Has anybody ever been a part of an organization that you could freely give feedback up and down the chain of command? Maybe not. And I'm not so sure that it's a very common thing. Oh, okay. So when you say very small businesses, like a family owned, or, um, oh, 2 to 5 employees, okay. It sometimes can be taboo, and I'm actually glad that you recognize that up front, because I'm going to make the bold claim that I think we can say almost anything to anyone if we say it the right way. But that's almost. There are times when the people in the chain of command aren't going to be receptive to feedback, and I'm going to give you some ideas on how to engage in that conversation and see if it will work. A couple of the other things that I wanted to point out is that feedback, when we give regular feedback, it's a part of a safety culture. So I worked out at NASA in the aerospace industry, and there were times when feedback wasn't welcome. And you probably are familiar with a couple of the major incidents that have happened out there. You give feedback to your coworkers because they constantly need it back. And do they give it back to you? That's great. That's great to have kind of a culture where you feel like you could freely give feedback like that. It's impressive. All right. A book, if you haven't read it, that I would highly recommend is Crucial Conversations. And the authors of this book were actually a part of the developers for Stephen Covey's Habit 5, Seek First, Understand, and Then to Be Understood. And they felt like Habit 5 didn't go as far as they wanted it to. And so they developed further their concepts and theories, and they put together the book Crucial Conversations. There were 4 of them. Really nice guys. I've had an opportunity to meet them. I really felt privileged to meet them. But in their book, Crucial Conversations, they make the bold claim that we can say almost anything to anyone if we say it in the right way. Just what I just said to you. And that includes feedback. And I'll be sharing with you a couple of their major pieces of their models to help you out. Again, I highly recommend this book if you haven't already read it. Feedback is about giving information. So sometimes we feel fearful to give feedback, and it seems like such a scary proposition because how are we going to say it, and how's the other person going to receive it, and what if I don't do it right? And so what I want to tell you is this: feedback is simply about giving information in a way that encourages your recipient to accept it, reflect on it, and learn from it, and hopefully make changes for the better. Essentially, feedback is just communication. So I want to take a little bit of the fear out of giving feedback. So I thought it was really important, if we're going to categorize feedback as communication, that I share with you some basic components of communication so we can kind of get an overall big picture. The first thing is that when I am communicating, I'm going to send a message. So there's a sender and a receiver. And the receiver then has to actually do something actively to get the message. They have to listen. And hopefully they hear and try to understand the message. But sometimes something called noise, and it's not just noise that we hear with our ears, can interfere with the ability for us to receive and perceive the message. And so we'll talk about what some of those environmental distractions are, but also we have internal distractions. Maybe it's what's going on in our head, or stress we're having, or things that are preoccupying our mind, or maybe it's a feeling we have about the person sending the message. So there are some things that can distract us from receiving the message. But something quick on listening. Again, I will reference Stephen Covey. I love his work. But in one of his videos, he said listening is emotional air. And he gave the example of if you were scuba diving and you were to lose your air, what would you be thinking about? Anybody take a guess? You lost your oxygen, what are you thinking about? You need air. Exactly. Listening is to the sender emotional air. They want someone to hear them. So being heard is emotional air. And if they don't feel like you've heard them, then you're going to keep hearing about or revisiting the same subject. Now, the way that they're going to know that you've heard them is you're going to let them know that you understand. You may paraphrase for them. You may confirm. You might say, here's what I understand you're trying to tell me. And maybe you're walking away with some actions and or expectations. And so you might say, well, this is what I've heard your concerns are, and this is what I think you're hoping that I'm going to do moving forward. Is that correct? And that makes such a big difference versus, I get it. I know what you're saying. I got it. See how that it would be a little bit different? I'm confirming I got it, but then how would I know, or you know as the sender of the message, whether I really do get it until I'm not producing the results versus we're communicating and you just say, let me just make sure I understand up to this point what, that we're in agreement on what we're talking about. And if there's anything that you're needing me to do, I want to make sure I clarify that. That's wholly different from, I got it. I know what I'm going to do. I'll follow up with you later. Very, very different. I hope that makes sense to you. Any questions on that, or can you see how the way we listen makes a difference? Okay, I'm going to move on. If you have any questions, let me know. But I can't stress enough how important being a good listener is. In the younger Stephen Covey, so the son, he wrote a book, The Speed of Trust, and he wrote this book and identified through his research, I forget how many thousands of people they interviewed in very successful businesses and very effective leaders, but he wrote and identified 13 behaviors of high trust leaders. And one of the behaviors of a high trust leader is that they listen, and they listen for understanding, and they understand the importance of not trying to speak until they do have a concept and a grasp of what they're listening for. So another good book. All right. Following on with the components, then, so the receiver has gotten the message. Hopefully they are now interpreting the message correctly. And so as the sender, we're hoping that they understand what we mean by whatever it is that we've said. The only way that we know whether or not they really truly understand is if they somehow respond and let us know. So again, those are the listening skills that I was referring to. It's confirming pieces that are understood, paraphrasing, talking about any actions maybe going forward, asking questions when there may not be understanding. So that's the basics of communication. And now let's how does feedback fit into this? There are lots of things that can distract from the message and from being good listeners. And so I think it's really important that we identify them up front. And if we think there's not a chance that any of these things could distract or dilute from the message, that we rethink how, when, or where we're going to give the message. So it's really important physically that we're in a space that's physically comfortable. And that would include private. So we don't want to give feedback or start a difficult conversation in a public setting. That would be uncomfortable and inappropriate and not well received. We want to make sure that the person doesn't have noise distractions, or that they have our full attention, that we're not on the phone. And we want to make sure timing is right. You don't want to wait till the end of the day and it's 10 minutes till shift is over and try to give someone feedback, because I don't think they're probably going to tune in to what you have to say, right? And we want to make sure that physically it's not too hot or not too cold, and that there's a comfortable place to sit down. And I have a picture of the beach down there, but I was thinking, you don't want to be looking out the window, just gazing off into space. You want to be able to focus on the message. There are some other things that can dilute the message that we're trying to send. And it could be factors like slang. So we want to make sure that we're using words that are common to everyone. And we don't want to use words that could have multiple meanings, right? And we want to make sure that have a safe physical environment to be a great listener. But what about a safe internal environment? And we're definitely going to talk about that. But clarify for me, Christopher, what you mean by the internal environment. Do you mean the relationship, or do you mean actually the physical safety inside of the institution? Or can you give me more information on that? A distracted mess. So do you mean mentally or actual physical mess inside? Mentally. Okay. So, and it would be you, the recipient, that feels distracted? Okay. So we're going to talk about safety. Actually, that kind of safety is coming right up. But is it mentally, is it because of the actual relationship that you have with the person that maybe you want to give feedback to? Or is it because maybe of mistrust? Or can you give me a little bit more information? Okay, relationship with the person. Excuse me. We're going to go there. We're going to talk about that. So some of that would be like the interpersonal distractions. And Interpersonal distractions could be the way that we feel about the person, and I'm going to talk about how we work on actually resolving some of these issues. So we'll be looking at interpersonal distractions, which I think will address the concern that you have. And then also a couple of other things that I want to point out is that the delivery of the feedback can often be more important than the actual message. And we have to be in tune to our own blind spots. So for example, if we're going to give feedback, we need to make sure that the person that's receiving the feedback feels safe to receive the feedback. And this is where I think that we're talking about safety this way with you, Christopher. So what makes us feel safe to receive a difficult message from someone? Think of someone who can tell you almost anything, and there's safety there, but what is it that makes you feel safe to receive that? That they're not judging you. So there's a level of trust. There's a level of respect, their character. So they've demonstrated that they have character and integrity. You can trust their intentions. This is where we're going. So their intent and probably the purpose. Practice what they preach. Yes. So I want to talk about two things, and they cover this in Crucial Conversations, but two of the things that need to be in place for people to feel safe enough to add to the meaning of the conversation and receive from the conversation are intent, and which is like the purpose of the conversation. Like I have to believe the purpose of you giving me feedback is genuine, that you want to help me improve, that you are interested in my growth and development, and that it's for positive reasons. And then also I have to feel like you respect me, and I have to respect you. So really there has to be mutual respect. Mutual purpose and mutual respect creates an atmosphere of safety and a relationship where we feel safe to input into each other's meaning or feedback. So in order to build or to identify mutual purpose, we have to listen to the other person and try to understand why they're giving feedback. So that would be the first thing. We have to be able to discern, well, why are they giving me feedback? Is what they're telling me valid? Is there a golden nugget of truth if perhaps I'm not in necessarily 100% agreement with what they're telling me? Is there something that is a golden nugget of truth that they're saying for a reason that's positive? And secondly, I want to make sure that that person respects me. If they don't respect me, then I would have a problem receiving feedback from them. I would think that if they don't exemplify those two things, then they don't walk the talk. So if there isn't mutual purpose, how do we build mutual purpose into the conversation? Well, first we can ask some questions and identify why they're providing us the feedback that they are providing us, and then we can work to identify a direction moving forward, which we'll talk about when we're applying the method. So ways that we can help others to feel safe in a conversation where we're going to be delivering feedback is to be aware of our blind spots. So tone of voice can be a blind spot. When I want to provide feedback to someone else, I want to make sure that my tone of voice is genuine and sincere, and that it doesn't have a level of sarcasm or anger associated to it. So, for example, if I were working on a project and someone just distracted me, and I would say, I wouldn't want to in anger respond that I'm working on a project, stop distracting me. Instead, I might say, I really appreciate that you're trying to get my attention, However, I need a few minutes to finish what I'm doing, and then I'd be glad to make some time so that we could discuss what's on your mind. So I would do it in a way that isn't angry, and that would invite them to have the discussion in just a moment. My facial expressions, it's going to be imperative that I have inviting facial expressions. I'll tell you, I work with someone, I coach a leader that has a deadpan look. And the look on her face, it never changes. So the other day I was providing her some information, communicating with her the results of our employee engagement survey with her. And the results were, they dropped from the previous year. They weren't terrible, but there was room for improvement. And her expression did not change the whole time. And she talked at about this level of intonation and change. It was so distracting, really, for me. And I wasn't sure if she was understanding the information that I was presenting to her. So it's important that we use facial expressions and tone of voice to change, to indicate understanding, and to provide safety as the sender of the message. And also to let people know the intent of the message is something that's positive, and that we want to make sure that they understand that we're providing feedback to grow them. So here's some tips to making it safe, and then I want to get to those models as quickly as possible because I want you to be able to try them out. But it's important to understand, first and foremost, again, you have to have mutual respect. If the person that you're about to provide feedback to is under the impression that you don't respect them, then how likely do you think it is that they will, that your message will be well received? Or let me ask you this, it's not likely. Have you ever received feedback from someone you do not respect? Yes. So that's going to be first and foremost. Now, I want to make sure that when you're providing the feedback, that you give your receiver an opportunity to respond to the feedback. And so some ways that you might allow them to do that, to say, how do you see the situation? So we'll talk about how you're actually going to deliver the feedback, but when you're asking them for ways that they see the situation, or how do you feel about the feedback that I've just provided, this allows them the opportunity to also contribute to the conversation. It's very important that you reflect the feelings of the person that you're providing the feedback to. So almost like a mirror. Perhaps they've given you a startled look, and you've begun to give them the feedback, and they've given you a startled look or a very surprised look. Then you might even reflect that. It seems like the feedback that I've provided you is a surprise. It seems so simple, but it gives the receiver the opportunity to say, well, yes, this is a surprise to me. I wasn't aware you felt that way, or I wasn't aware that my behavior had that impact. So allowing them the opportunity to contribute to the conversation, to be a part of that conversation, will dramatically change the reception of the feedback. I think it's also important that at the end of providing the feedback that you do offer suggestions. And I think sometimes we may be unaware of maybe the way that we're performing, the impact it has, or how it may be deficient. And so we might need someone to help us to understand what might be a better way of performing, or a way we could expand our skills or get better. After all, when I asked you earlier, why are some reasons you like feedback? Some of them were because you want to get better, you want to expand your skills, you want new ways of doing things, right? Okay, so we got to make sure that we're looking for signs of defensiveness. What are some indicators that somebody feels defensive? Yes, definitely. So immediately they might start making excuses, be very short. Okay, fine, whatever, get flustered. You may see even physical signs. They turn red um, or get flushed. Try to change the conversation. Uh, Shifting blame. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. Definitely. We're going to see body language. You guys are right. You get right on track with feeling defensive. So it's also important that you identify these in yourself when you receive feedback. It can sometimes be difficult to receive feedback, but if you're getting difficult feedback, the one thing I want you to tell yourself is that there may be something in this feedback that's going to make me better, even if it is difficult to hear. Listen for things that may be factual or that you could use to be better, adjust your performance, adjust your behavior. It's very important that you're able to do that. Okay. It's also important that when you give feedback, again, we talked about giving feedback at the right time. And before you even provide the feedback, I'm hoping that you'll have planned it out using some of the models that we are going to look at in just 1 minute, and focus on the value that you're going to provide to the receiver, not on, well, at least they know what I'm thinking. Because if your feedback is geared toward, well, at least they know what I'm thinking, then you're not coming from the right intentions or motivations. And I would encourage you not to give that feedback. Okay? So using our models, you're going to be able to provide information about something that's been observed so that your receiver has a precise, exact understanding of what the behavior was and the impact the behavior had. Furthermore, we're going to offer information on how to improve based on what we observed. So it's critical that it's specific so that they know exactly. It's given at the right time. We talked about being timed, having it given at the right time, and also that it's balanced. You talked about wanting feedback that was balanced, where we have some positives and we have room for improvement. But I want to ensure you that even the best feedback, if it's given at an inappropriate time, can be very detrimental. It can do more harm than good. And so it's very important to consider timing. You need to be sensitive to your receiver. All right, so these are the models that we're going to take a look at. Have any of you seen the STAR AR feedback model before? This is one of the more common ones, and so I'm curious if anybody has seen this one. Okay, I'm thinking no, if I haven't seen that. We have another one, and I've shortened it to the behavior, consequence, direction model, and then state, tell, and ask. So we're going to start with the STAR AR model, and make sure that your feedback is focused on the what, how, when, and where. I want you to remember that it's important that you stay away from the why. You want to focus on things that are observable and objective when giving feedback. If you try to describe the why someone said or did something, then it implies that you know their motive or in their intent. And we don't know necessarily someone's motive or intent, and we don't want to presume to know their motive or intent. And so I recommend you stay away from trying to describe the why someone did something. Instead, focus on the, not the why, but the what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and where it happened. Because those things, again, are observable and objective. And also balance your feedback and try to stay away from words like never and always. Those are typically ineffective. All right, let's get right into the STAR AR model and how we can provide feedback using this particular model. Now, first of all, this is an acronym, and the S stands for the situation. The T stands for the task. We're going to take a look at a very specific one. A is the action and R is the result. So you'll use STAR if you're just providing feedback about something that was done effectively. And you're going to add on the AR, which is alternative action and alternative result, if you're providing feedback that's corrective in nature. So let's take a look at our first one, so you can see the model filled out. So Etta, yesterday in the talent management committee, so that's the situation that we're describing in the task, I saw you handle a difficult question from Sheila in a very clear, calm, professional tone. Right there. As a result, Sheila and other committee members understood your message and what they need to do for rolling out the program. That was the result. So you can see it's very short and to the point, but it provides positive information and would help the recipient to repeat similar behaviors next time. Any questions about this particular model? This is just a quick example of how you're going to apply it. And I'm going to give you some examples in just a minute and let you apply them as well. What do you think about this model? And do you feel like it's easy to understand? Would this be a model that you think you could use to provide a coworker feedback? Or would it be something realistic? Like already. Wonderful. I'm glad you already did this, Christopher. This is absolutely perfect for interviews. Good. Yes, we can apply this to negative feedback. So we're going to add on the AR. So the star AR feedback is for negative. The star feedback we'll use for positive feedback. Situation and task are very, very similar. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you another model that will allow you to kind of change it up. But this is the first one. So when we talk about situation or task, we're talking about situation could be when and where, and task is what you actually did. And then or what you were supposed to do, then action is what you actually did, and then R is the result that you got. So this is a quick one. I will tell you, this is not my favorite model, but I think it is one of the most common ones. And I think this is a good one to use during interviews. And we use this with our leadership team. So this is why I brought this one to you. Now let's look at it if it were corrective in nature. Sally, yesterday was the deadline for the operations report. So that's the situation, all right? So there was a deadline. I see that you submitted the report today, a day late. As a result, our department did not meet the deadline. So the result is that the deadline was not met. Now, I'm going to ask you for an alternative action. That's when I use the next AR. You need to inform me as soon as possible if you foresee missing a deadline so we can plan alternate actions. This is what I want you to do differently. And here's what I think the result's going to be. By doing this, we will continue to meet expectations. So this is providing corrective feedback in nature for the STAR AR model. This is, I believe, a very simple model, and I think you can probably fill in the blanks. Now, I don't want to spend any more time on this particular model unless you have any questions, but also at the end of this PowerPoint, there's or maybe it is something Caitlin's going to send to you guys, but there's a Word document that you can use as a template for this particular model. If you word the second A as in, can you inform me as soon as possible, or is this too passive? If you ask, can you, thank you, Caitlin, for doing that. Can you inform me as soon as possible? Then you're leaving it open for, well, I won't have time to do that, or it's not going to be possible for me to do that, when you know that the expectation is. So you have to determine, is it your expectation that they're going to inform you as soon as possible, or is it okay with you if they don't? If it's the expectation, then I would word it that I need you to. So maybe not you need to, but maybe it is I need you to inform me as soon as possible. Then you're taking ownership and it feels less like you're pointing the finger. Would that work? Do you think that feels better? Yes, in the future, I need you to. And I like in the future because then you're not focusing on the past anymore. Good job. Okay. Moving forward. So the next one that I like, behavior consequence direction or behavior impact direction. This is, I think, a pretty effective one for corrective feedback. So first we start off with, what was the specific behavior? Is it a one-time behavior? Is it a behavior that you see a pattern? Is it a behavior that has affected the relationship? So you need to think through kind of what was the behavior that you saw that needs correction or needs to change in the future. And based on what you saw or heard and what you're going to tell them, you need to be able to spell out what the consequence was. So maybe the person was late to work. I'm going to give you an example. I wrote down an example. Your coworker has shown up for her shift 15 minutes late 3 times in a row. She is the person who is scheduled to relieve you from your shift. You end up having to complete part of her tasks until she arrives. Also, since you are night shift and getting off on time is important to you, or also since you're night shift, getting off on time is important so that you can get your daughter to school in time. You ask your boss to intervene. So your boss is going to approach this situation. If you are the boss, you need to start with the behavior. So it looks like in this situation, there's a pattern. And what's the pattern? Pattern is coming in late for work 3 times in a row. And then as the manager, you'd want to describe the impact. And you could do this as the peer as well, but we're going to do it from this perspective for a moment. What's the impact or the consequences to those involved? I absolutely can do that. Think about what is the impact. So as the leader, you want to talk about, is there an impact to overtime? Is there an impact to your peer? Clearly there is, because your peer is the one who asked the manager to speak up. Is there an impact to the client, or in this case, maybe it's the patient? Since I work at a hospital, I frequently use a patient as one of the people that would be involved. Your obligations or commitment to the company. Yes, Christopher. So not only keeping a commitment, having integrity and character, working within the values of the organization, and but also part of your commitment is you have a contract. I work from this hour to this hour. I don't need to have incidental overtime. Or I have a commitment to my peer that they won't be completing tasks that I have to complete. So the impact, this is clearly where you would spell out those things, obligations and commitments. And then give a direction. So this is the behavior, this is the consequence. Here's what I need to see. In the future, I need to see this moving forward. This is what I'm asking you for you to do. So here's an example. We wouldn't want to say, if you're late again, I'm going to write you up. You would get your message across, but you would get specific compliance, but you might not build that relationship. Instead, you want to state what the impact is. When you're late, it causes our patient care to suffer. Or when you're late, your peer misses out on the opportunity to take her daughter to school. So spelling out the impact sometimes it gives a greater sense of urgency to the person who has violated the behavior they typically would have agreed upon. And then in the future, would you please show up on time? And then you just spell out what you would like them to do in the future. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you ask if they're able to keep that commitment. Is this something that you can commit? Can I get your agreement to do that? And is there any support you need from me? So this might be either this might be a leader to a subordinate, or you could even do this peer-to-peer. Any questions on this particular model? I hate that we're so close to the end. I'm gonna share another piece for you. We may go over a couple of minutes. Caitlin, I hope that's okay. I do want to tell you guys up front, if you have questions, I want you to feel free to reach out to me anytime. I want to provide you my information where you can do that. You can email me, and I'd be happy to practice conversations with you. I'm going to skip these, and I want to go to my last model. Sorry, I think it's back a ways. Oops. I go back to, here it is, up the feedback chain. So yeah, so I want you to feel free to reach out to me, and we can talk about a conversation if you have a difficult one. If you have any questions, I'm glad to go through that with you. I just want to put that out there for you. This one is feedback up and down the chain. And this is more about how to get the conversation started, and then you could use the model that we just talked about. And this is how I frequently coach my leaders at work to speak to one another as peers. And I talk to them about how to speak to managers to their directors, or directors to the C-suite. And I also coach staff on how to talk to one another using this as a way to enter a conversation and then use the model going forward. So oftentimes it is difficult to enter a conversation. So I might even say, do you have time to talk about something? It's kind of a difficult conversation that I want to have with you. So if you have some time later. So I'm letting that person know up front, this is not the most comfortable conversation to have, but it's important. And oftentimes that takes someone's guard down instead of, I need to talk to you. It has a little bit different of a message. So I will try to email you guys some other conversation starters like that, but that's an example. Now, when I get into the conversation, the first thing that I want to say is, I would like to provide you some feedback about an event, or and this is I love this template, and I'm glad that you said that, Christopher, because this is about facts. But notice that the second part is you get to tell what story you told yourself based on the facts that you have. And so that's where you start. The other day so I'm kind of setting it up. This is what happened. The other day when we were in a meeting, you said, and maybe I'll spell out what they said. And it needs to be something that I did see, or that I observed, or that I heard them say. So I'm giving them some facts. And based on what I saw or heard, this is what I made of those facts, or this is the story I told myself. I actually feel like it is okay to say, this is the story I told myself. That way they understand these are the assumptions I made. It's and I'm owning that I may not have all the facts. In fact, more than likely I don't. More than likely I missed some information. And so based on the story that I told myself, this is how I felt about it. So I can even tell them that I want to share my feelings about it, or this is, what I thought about it. Do I have all the information that I need? This is where you ask, do I have the information that I need, and have I made the correct assumptions? So I'm gathering the information up front. Then I can go back to, well, based on then the information that I've gathered and what I saw and observed, really the impact is this. So then you can circle back to the other model with the impact. In the future, I'd like to see and you can talk about a direction you'd like to go. I like this model the very best. I like it because, one, feedback is not always comfortable to give, and so I'm taking responsibility for the feedback that I'm going to provide, because I'm letting you know this is what I saw or heard and this is what I made of it. I'm not even sure I have all the information. Could you fill me in if I don't have all the information, so that moving forward we're making better decisions and providing better feedback? What do you guys think about this? Do you think it'll be helpful? Yes, so that's part of the intent. And the part where it takes away the defensiveness is, I'm letting you know that this is what I made of what I saw or heard, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% accurate. And I understand that it may not be accurate, and I want to invite you to give me more information because I may be missing something. And so you're exactly right. What tends to happen is it does take the conversation down a notch. We are working towards a shared understanding. It's definitely not accusatory, it's inviting. It allows us to kind of brainstorm together, and we can look together for, what do you think we should do differently? I can be a part of this. It's almost like you can use this for a mentoring conversation. Oftentimes I'll use this when I'm mentoring someone as well. Yeah. All right, good deal. I have gone 4 minutes past. Are there any questions or situations that you had wanted to work through personally? We could maybe take one or two and we could match the model to it.
Thank you so much, Julia. And we did have a question from Heather that she asks if you could speak a little bit about your education history, as she's pursuing a master's in education and communication and is curious what your background is.
Absolutely. So my undergrad is actually in communication, and my graduate degree was in organization development, IO psychology. And I have furthered my education with various certificates and really worked to get different certifications, such as I do have a certification to train in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I have a certification to train in crucial conversations. I have a change management certification. So what I do recommend is that, and what I've tried to do is, any opportunity for extra learning, development, certifications, I take every opportunity I can to grow and develop my skills. Nicole, I also see you have a comment down here as well. It is great stuff, and here's what I'll tell you. This takes practice. I live in Texas, and we get a lot of hurricanes. And the way that I prepare for a hurricane, we do it every year. We think about, if a hurricane were to come, what do I need? What do I have to have in place? I practice conversations the same way. It almost sounds probably a little bit psychotic, but occasionally I'll think about a conversation and I'll think to myself, how would I have done that conversation differently? Or what if someone says this? What if I have an opportunity to provide so-and-so feedback? How might I provide that to them? How could I make that conversation feel safe so they'd be more receptive to it? I'm constantly doing that so that it does feel genuine, and it is more intuitive with practice. What I will tell you is that if you're genuine, people will know that. And if you have ulterior motives, people can see through those. I really want to encourage each one of you to look at the book, The Speed of Trust, or Google just the 13 Behaviors of a High Trust Leader, because those are ways that you can establish trust. We can be trustworthy people, but if it's not, doesn't resonate with the person that is receiving information from us in whatever form, then they may not trust us. So I can speak honestly to you, but if the way that I speak honestly to you is in a way that resonates with you, you're not going to trust me. I can listen to you, but if I'm not listening in a way that you get it, then you're not going to believe that I'm actually listening.